Welcome to the ID 16.9 podcast, where we assess legal identity issues around the world, and more specifically, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 16.9 for legal identity for all, including birth registration, by 2030. I'm your producer and host, Frank Hersey. In this episode, we're exploring another 16.9. Well, not for Americans with your back-to-front dates. This is the 16th of the 9th, the 16th of September. It's the date that identity-promoting organisation ID for Africa has chosen as International Identity Day. And it's a date that's catching on. In this episode, we'll hear from government, civil society, and the private sector. So, back in 2018, ID for Africa at its summit in Abuja launched the day as a proposal and petition to the UN. ID for Africa hopes that the day will get full UN recognition in its calendar as a way to promote identity issues. A coalition of supporters was created where organisations could pledge their support. These include UN agencies, MasterCard, the World Bank, GSMA and OpenCRVS, who we heard from in episode 3. This year the messaging has changed a little as the name continues to evolve to ID Day rather than International Identity Day, perhaps in response to the way it's marked more locally around the world. And for 2022, the fourth year of the event, there's a new slogan: because everyone deserves an identity, identity deserves a day. So that's what ID Day is about, but what does it really mean? The day itself is becoming controversial among civil society organisations, which raise concerns over the negative effects of national ID systems and their surveillance implications, and warn that the day is becoming commercialised. Dr. Joseph Attic, the Executive Chair of ID for Africa, highlighted this year that private companies in the ID sector are not eligible to join the coalition. Instead, they can join the Friends of the Coalition category. We're going to hear from people from a range of areas in this episode. From Uganda about their activities to mark the day as part of their efforts to increase birth, death and national ID registration. We have a few notes from the private sector throughout the episode, and we'll hear too from Privacy International about their views. Let's hear from HID Global, which makes physical and digital ID products. This is Matt Wynn, Senior Director for Public Relations and Corporate Communications, on what ID Day means to them and how they market.
HID is a friend of the International Identity Day Coalition. We've joined over 160 development agencies, government and public interest organizations who are coalition partners to support this initiative and the United Nations Sustainability Goal that calls for a legal identity for everyone, including birth registration, by 2030. This year, we've engaged in a social media campaign to drive awareness that more than 1 billion people around the globe lack a legal ID and why it matters to those of us who might take that for granted. We believe in making it possible for people to learn confidently, work productively, transact safely, and travel freely. Legal identity for all is at the core of this belief. It's a mechanism for increasing social justice and economic growth, securing and protecting citizens' rights, and enabling access to key services like education. Our goal in all of this is to effect this change through support of International Identity Day. Here at HID, we collaborate with governments to define and deliver scalable programs, including civil registry and vital statistics that empower governments to record events such as births, deaths, and marriages, and then derive statistics from that data to inform their planning, decision-making, and most importantly, delivery of critical services. In fact, here at HID, we're proud to support more than 60% of the world's government ID programs.
Interesting to note the connection with legal identity and accessing government services, as we explored in episode 4. Let's hear now from Suprema ID. This is Paul Kennedy, Head of Sales for Europe and Africa.
Suprema ID fully supports the goal of SDG 16.9 to provide a legal entity for all by 2030. We applaud the initiatives being taken by governments around the world to meet this goal. Suprema ID firmly believes that everyone is entitled to an identity document, not only as a fundamental legal right, but also as a means to have access to services such as banking, education, health, voting, and to obtain documentation for international travel. Suprema ID manufactures and supplies technology to provide governments with the tools for biometric enrollment of citizens and verification of citizens at the point of service provision.
We now turn to Uganda to hear how they marked the day. Uganda has been heavily criticised for its requirements to register for national ID in Dagamuntu to be able to access services. People have been turned away from health services, and the elderly in particular have struggled to receive welfare when they've been unable to register for the ID. The authorities are trying to increase registration, in part with ID Day activities. Joining me now from Kampala are Edwin Tukamuhebwa, Manager of Registration and Operations at NIRA, Uganda's National Identification and Registration Authority, and Faridah Nassozi, Client Relations Officer at NIRA, who was very much involved in marking International Identity Day. So, general question to both of you. How did Uganda mark International Identity Day?
Thank you, Frank. We are very glad to mark the International Identity Day on the 16th of September in Kampala, Uganda here. And we organized activities which were interactive. So we decided to get out of our normal offices to go and interact with the public. So we have a place called the City Square in the middle of the city, Kampala City, and other people refer to it as Constitutional Square. So on that day, that's where we set our offices.
Mm-hmm.
So we invited the public. It's an open place, so the public came for an interaction about any issue relating to identification and registration, including birth registration and death registration, by the way, because they are part of the cycle of identity, of identification. So we offered a full-blown service to the public in that place. So it was a one-stop center for all services. Basically, we would say that all the offices were actually shifted to that place to ensure that there is a complete interaction with the public.
Was that just in Kampala, or was it in other parts of the country as well?
It was in Kampala.
Okay, and maybe to supplement, on top of the activities at Constitutional Square, we also had a full-page pull-out in the biggest newspaper in the country, the New Vision, with questions and answers about International ID Day and what it means. Yeah, so that one circulated all over the country. We also, like Amanda said, it also included birth. So we had another team at one of the health centers in Kampala, Chisenyi Health Center 4, where we're registering birth and also for national ID.
Maybe to add on that, to elaborate more, when we mentioned that it was a full-blown package, service package, it had a bit of information sharing, what we could call sensitization, education, and we had all the services, registration for identification services, replacement of a national ID, change of particulars on a national ID, and then birth and death registration. And also we had a legal team that was also providing the service on the site. So it was really an amazing outreach.
And so did you find that with having your staff, your colleagues out in the squares, in the health centre, that it was easier for people to approach you and ask questions rather than even having to come into an office and find an office? Did you find there was less of a barrier for people to approach you?
Yeah, that's true. People were extremely very comfortable with that, approaching us outside our office environment. So the city square, or what other people call the Constitutional Square, is just an open space. So it is in the middle of the city center. So everybody just passes by, and people were actually coming. They found it extremely comfortable and easy for them to approach us.
And did you have any idea of the numbers of people who were there on the 16th? Were the stalls busy?
Yes, at Constitutional Square or City Square, where we had our main activities, we served 695 clients. Those are the people who approached us at our stalls in that particular setting, 695 for a variety of services, as earlier mentioned. Yes.
And so, do you know how many people might come into the office on a normal day? I mean, so is 600-700 people? Is that a lot more than would normally come and get advice?
We have very many registration centers that are scattered across the country. To be very exact, we have 117 registration centers scattered across the country. But the highest that does most normally receives an average of 180 clients in a day. And it is also in Kampala, what we call Kampala Metropolitan. Now, I think why we actually got a bigger number than what is realized at one of our busiest centers is because of being out there and the comfort of the people finding us outside our work environment.
Why did you choose that as an activity? I was wondering how you decided to have this big presence out in the open.
I think one of the main things is to demystify, like you said, where people are comfortable approaching us there. People see us in our offices every day, and to see us out there, especially in the middle of town, where everyone can approach us freely. People were passing. We had loudspeakers, so people would just pass and say, "Oh, what are you doing here today? NIRA, you also come out and meet us instead of us coming to you." So people were really excited about the fact that we moved out of our offices and went to them. Yes.
Good.
Frank,
yes?
To supplement what Faridah has said, we normally run outreaches. We conduct outreaches across the country. But normally our outreaches target the rural areas because they find it a little challenging to move from their villages to our registration center. Now, this one was conducted in the middle of the city, and it was one of the kind. We had never done an outreach in the middle of the city. So it was unique in that way that the people of the city actually saw us in the middle of the city, outside our head offices, outside our registration centers, 5 registration centers that we have in Kampala city, and they saw us in the middle of the city providing services to them.
And so this event was because of International Identity Day or ID Day, and it seems like you had a good number of people compared to a normal day. I was wondering whether you might consider doing a similar event more often, or is it something that you'll save for ID Day each year? Do you think it needs to be a big occasion?
Yes, we'll actually do a bigger event come the next ID Day, because from the experience that we got as we were sharing with you, that people felt very comfortable. And besides, by providing the service, we want the information to reach each and everyone. So come next year, we are going to run a full-blown activity across all the districts and cities of Uganda. We have 136 districts and 10 cities in Uganda. So come next ID Day, each city, each district will be commemorating this day, and they will run activities in their areas of jurisdiction. But this time, specifically for Kampala, we plan to do something bigger because it is the heart of the country.
So I suppose this year was a sort of, well, I don't say practice because it was a successful, but it was the first step. Then it sounds like to doing something even bigger. Did you have any support from any other countries who are also marking International Identity Day? were you talking to ID for Africa, the organization, ahead? Did they help with planning, or were there any private organizations helping, or international organizations other than ID for Africa in setting it up? And then also in helping setting up, and then do you get together afterwards to discuss with other people the successes you've had and tips for each other for next year?
As usual, ID for Africa normally supports us. And still for this day, they supported us with giving us information on promotional materials. So we had promotional materials. They shared information with us concerning the ID day. So we went out there with their support because our teams were well briefed about the ID day. They appreciated why it should be there, and they explained it to the people. But as far as other countries coming in to support us, no, we run this activity as Uganda. Yes.
And I think that's an interesting point, because I think I've noticed a little bit of a trend with International Identity Day. And I think it was always part of it as well at the beginning, part of the plans, in that there's almost two strands to it. There's the international level, where I know ID for Africa is hoping that the UN will recognize it as a day. But then it seems like it has to work for each individual country, because it's your own country's ID system that you're helping people learn about, or maybe even registering them on the day. So I suppose there's two different levels to International Identity Day. And I was wondering whether it's marked as an official day in Uganda, because I understand it is in Nigeria and Namibia. I was wondering if you know whether the government is making it an official day for Uganda each year.
Like Edwin mentioned earlier, this was a first of its kind for us to celebrate it this way. And next year we intend to do it even bigger and better, more across the country. And hopefully then we are going to bring more stakeholders on board, maybe even include private stakeholders, private companies, other government stakeholders, and hopefully also get bigger buy-in from the government. But for now, it's not an official holiday in Uganda.
Okay.
It is recognized as an International ID Day, but it's not an official holiday. It's not a holiday.
But it sounds
maybe if I could actually add on that, we will try to lobby government to make it an official day. It may not necessarily be a public holiday, but it should be an official day, so that we join the international community in commemorating this day, and also to help us push out the message to the public, and also join the rest of our colleagues in other countries in celebrating and commemorating this day.
Yes, and I think that sounds like the overall aim of ID for Africa as well, in promoting International Identity Day within the UN for that greater global recognition. For Uganda, we also have to think about legal identity. I suppose that there's the different layers of identity. There's legal identity, which the United Nations is marking with SDG 16.9, for legal identity for all, including birth registration. And then there's the other level with the actual national ID system that you have, the Ndagamuntu. And I was wondering whether you find International Identity Day more useful for the drive for birth registration and, the base layer of legal identity, or is it more important for registering for national ID, or is it for both?
We run an integrated system where your registration is supposed to start with birth registration as proof of your legal identity. And it is at that point that you are assigned a NIN, National Identification Number, which you run throughout your life. And then you receive your national ID when you reach 16 years of age. So this campaign helped us to achieve both objectives. And as you noted in Faridah's submission, she indicated that we ran a birth registration campaign
Yes.
at one of the busiest health centers in Kampala, which is called Chisenyi Health Center 4. So basically, we ran two activities at the same time, but they were all complementing each other. So the day was actually important and it was relevant for both activities.
So I suppose I'm looking at it as an outsider, looking at birth registration and national ID as more like two separate things. Do you think in general in Uganda, people understand that you need the birth registration as part of registering for national ID? And so those two things are clearly part of International ID Day.
I may not say that most people understand it.
Okay.
Because the institution NIRA is 6 years old now, but it's part of our efforts that we've been undertaking to sensitize the public and educate them about birth registration and identification registration. So right now, it is a continuous activity. In all the activities that we do, we emphasize it. The messages that we put out there emphasize the importance of birth registration and identification registration. So it is an ongoing effort. At this point, we can't say that everybody understands those two processes very well, but we hope we'll get there.
And it sounds like the activities such as International Identity Day help you with that awareness raising. With, for example, with your newspaper pullout, is the hope that
Absolutely.
that will make people more aware of? Would you say the problem is awareness at all about registering, or being able to access registration centres?
I think it's a bit of both. Like my colleague mentioned, we have offices, 117 across the country, but still the country is big. So 117 is many, but still not enough. But also in the capital city where our head office is, we have 6 offices, but we still have people who are not registered. And on that day, people were even passing by because we had loudspeakers, we had messages about registration playing. People would come and say, "Oh, what are you doing here? We are commemorating International ID Day. Why?" So we would explain to them what the day is about, and if they've not registered, why they need to register. So awareness is still there. There are people who it hasn't really sunk in why they need the ID, and that's an ongoing effort with NIRA to make sure everyone knows why they need to register and to make sure they register. But yes, even access to services, especially a country where our offices are far from, some people are very far from our offices, that is also a challenge. So it's both ways.
No, that is interesting that even in the capital, you can have an activity and people are finding out about it for the first time. And I suppose the hope is then that the people who you meet out on the square will tell friends and family and bring more people in to register.
Yes, the people know that NIRA exists. They know NIRA gives IDs, but some of them haven't appreciated why they need to do so. So that's one of the information we're giving out to them. We gave them brochures with information. We gave them more to go and share, and hopefully they will take the message back home.
So you had, 700 people coming to see you on the day. Do you think you might see a bump in Kampala of more people coming to register in the next weeks after the word spreads?
Yes, definitely. We have actually seen the impact of that activity in all our registration centers in Kampala. Like we mentioned, we have 5 division centers and then the headquarters. We have seen an increase in the walk-ins and the crowds of people who are coming to access our services. And something that we are actually considering is that from the response that we got from the people, we are going to continue doing an activity on that very spot, the city square, every month. So we'll select one weekend where we will run the activity from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday as a way of consolidating on the achievements that we realized on the Identity Day. And then come next year, people should be aware, and it will really give us mileage and a shoot to do something that is bigger.
And just to talk about the birth registration side a little bit as well. Obviously, that was in a different location in Kampala, not on the square. Will you do more activities in health centres to increase awareness of the importance of birth registration as well?
Yes, we do. First and foremost, the beginning of birth registration in Uganda, at the beginning of the process, is birth notification, which is conducted by the health center staff. So they give information to the mothers who come to access the services and even the fathers who come to the health facility for any services. However, we have a specific effort on each and every day of immunization. We actually reach out to those health facilities to give information to the mothers who come who bring their children for immunization. So that's how we actually run it for now.
I was reading on your website, well, 2 points here. I was reading that Rosemary Kasembo said last year that birth registration is running at about 12%, something like 159,000 out of, was it about 1.3 million births per year? And then I saw in your information around ID Day that you said that as an organisation, NIRA pledges to continue to strive for excellence until we have 100% birth and death and citizen registration. So I was wondering whether this new venture with big activities around ID Day and beyond might really accelerate, might really catch people's attention and help accelerate that registration rate.
Yes, these activities definitely are geared towards accelerating registration to achieve that. If you've kept track of our statistics, we currently have 17 million Ugandans who are not registered for national ID. And part of our plans next year, part of the efforts to achieve 100% national ID registration, birth and death registration, we are planning a mass enrollment exercise early next year, geared towards registering those 17 million who are not yet registered, offering full circle services, birth, death registration, and national ID registration for all the Ugandans who don't have the services, who haven't yet enrolled on the services. So hopefully by next year, by the time we are done with that mass enrollment, which we plan to do early next year, we will be a lot closer to the 100 than where we are right now.
So will that be your biggest... Go on.
If I could supplement on what Faridah is saying, this activity that we did actually feeds into the mass registration exercise we are going to conduct next year. And part of what we were doing was to sensitize the public and give them information. And the information was ranging from the services that we provide, but most importantly, on the importance of identification or registration, birth and death registration as well. So we hope to capitalize on the information that was sent out, because actually after that day there was a lot of conversation and interaction on social media about what was going on at City Square and Senior Health Center. So we hope to leverage on that interaction. We are sure a lot of information went out, and we are sure that it was helpful in our efforts to realize 100% birth registration, death, and also identification registration.
Well, it sounds like it was an important part of building that momentum. ID Day was an important part of building the momentum for your much bigger activity next year. So I look forward to hearing more about that activity next year. I'm sure I'll be reading about it, and maybe we could catch up again to see how it goes and see if it has a big impact on all those different rates of registration you're hoping for. I'd just like to say thank you both very much. Was there anything else you would like to add about the situation in Uganda or about ID Day before we finish?
Personally, I would just like to say that it was a success. It was the first time we've commemorated the day this way, and it was a big success. It sent out a lot of information. We hope to do it even bigger next year, but we're already reaping results from what we had that day. We also had TV interviews with our executive director. She was interviewed by different TV stations. So also those interviews played on TV at the end of the day. So a lot of information went out, and we are going to see a lot of results from that. It was a successful day.
Yeah, our commitment is that we will keep commemorating this day, and we will also lobby government to make it an official day, because it feeds into the development goals. So as a country, we are moving towards that, and then we will make deliberate efforts to ensure that this day is commemorated every year, and also we'll have quite a number of activities to do on that day to ensure that it makes an impact to the socio-economic development of our country.
Well, that all sounds very positive, helping people to register to make sure that they have all the identification documents they need and can then access everything they need to access. Thank you both so much for joining me today to discuss how Uganda handles ID Day and how it will in the future. So, Faridah Nassozi, Client Relations Officer at NIRA, and Edwin Tukamuhebwa, Manager of Registration and Operations, also at NIRA. Thank you both very much.
Thank
you too.
Before we turn to civil society, let's hear one more note from the private sector. This is Julia Thomas, VP for Marketing at Tech5. Astute as ever, bringing in another dimension to identity, individuals' ability to control it.
We at Tech5 support recognition of International Identity Day because we truly believe that together with members of the ID Day Coalition, we can make a difference by explaining its importance to the community. We are looking forward to witnessing a future in which every individual in the world has a digital identity that he or she fully owns and manages, because everyone deserves an identity. Identity deserves a day.
The ability to edit and know about how your ID profile is being used were covered to by the UNDP's Niall McCann back in episode 2, and it's something we hope to return to in more depth. Now onto civil society. I spoke to Tom Fisher, senior researcher at Privacy International, based in London, and which promotes, well, privacy around the world. We were speaking for our next episode on exclusion and used the opportunity to also talk about International Identity Day. Here I asked Tom whether it can be as straightforward as having a day to promote identity.
I think it's really important to have an approach which looks at all sides of the issues surrounding ID. So one of the issues this ID Day that's Privacy International and our network of partners are doing is kind of giving a perspective on some of the dangers, some of the issues that arise, the exclusion which can come from these kind of systems, from the people who don't have access to ID or can't use it because it doesn't represent, say, the gender identity they present themselves as. Some of the insecurity, many of our partner organizations are scared around what happens around data leaks used by government police, but also criminal organizations, partner violence, all these kind of issues. And then also surveillance, how it can be used to track you and across so many different aspects of your life, both by government agencies, both by security services, police, whoever, but also private sector now has a fantastic entry into what's happening across your life. So I think it's really, really important to present what we see as some of these risks and dangers of these kind of systems, because it's not enough just to say that these are amazing and fantastic things are happening surrounding ID around the world. We're seeing so much which produces new dangers and risks and people affected, excluded, made more insecure and surveilled. Quite a lot of the time, what we see emerging from organizations like, say, ID for Africa promoting it is purely that kind of positive view, as well as frequently a view of a single model, ADA-like biometric, unique, numbered system being the only one that is being kind of promoted, the only one is worthy of being kind of a digital ID system in the modern age. What we'd really like is we need to, first of all, remember why ID Day is on the 16th of September because of SDG 16.9, talk about birth registration, legal identity, birth registration, these kind of factors. How do we kind of bring it back to that, away from biometrics, databases, all the risks associated with that? How do we debate what kind of solutions there are for the identity issues? How do we use it as an opportunity for this kind of debate as to identifying the problems, and how do we come up with ways forward, particularly involving civil society, who've been a leading figure in critiquing so many of these systems? How do we use this as an opportunity for debate rather than purely kind of government-led promotion of a particular model, which all too often is opposed by aspects of civil society and comes with it huge human rights risks?
And I suppose it could be as simple as a little bit of a change and to make it International Legal Identity Day. Even ID for Africa itself might argue that that would sound a little bit too complicated, and it's great just to have any thought around ID at all. But even looking at the country which seems to have embraced it most wholeheartedly so far, that would be Nigeria. In Nigeria, it is marked, but it's actually National ID Day. It's not international. And I do wonder whether that is, in a way, to help in their own scheme, rolling out their own national ID, which is biometric and a lot more complex than just legal identity.
I think we're going to see specific needs in different contexts, and to see a day in which we can promote broader inclusion, maybe promotions of birth registration, that kind of things. And I know it's a PR exercise within the country, but there's sometimes a place for that. I think, though, that when it's used by the central government as a way of promoting their particular policy without that kind of broader engagement, and when they're doing that backed by ID for Africa, as well as the other organizations operating in that space, that is a hugely top-down process, bringing the entire weight of basically the national government and the international organizations upon the issue. Whereas that's not going to get to the kind of meaningful solutions to people's problems, how they're affected in their day-to-day lives by the need for identity or their exclusion or the problems they face when there's been kind of a data breach or all these kinds of issues. I think there's so much there happening in the interest of the powerful. We need to hear more from the increasing number of voices emerging from society who are concerned about this, who have their issues felt, and use the opportunity like the 16th of September to hear from and engage with those voices. That's good for everyone, because that's how you build kind of legitimacy in what you're doing. That's how you build build relationships of trust and all these sets of issues, rather than just a day in which sell a particular policy idea,
Yeah.
which is frequently very, very problematic.
I suppose it's like so much of the technology itself, it is how the day is implemented, because there's the danger of, if it's made into a United Nations International Day of Identity, then that gives it so much more clout, and it could be then a sort of authorization for governments to then say, look, there's a whole United Nations Day devoted to this around the world, and this is what the system is going to be in our country. It could actually give governments even more power to implement a system.
I think they could do well if it does become a UN mandated day to recognise the centrality of human rights within the UN system, and therefore the need for that to be at the centre of any debate, any discussion surrounding ID on that day, rather than just an exercise in exercising that power. How do we recognise people's rights in the context of ID system? And a day recognizing that, a day appreciating how civil registration can do that, but also a day that begins to critique. People can ask, why do I need my ID to do X, Y, Z? That then becomes something that we can all get behind.
Oh yeah,
and that serves to the benefit of of the developmental needs, of the goals of all these organizations. You can't just keep putting this down upon people in this top-down process. We need to appreciate more these challenges that people face.
Yes, I agree. And it'd be interesting if it weren't actually just limited to legal identity, as I suggested, because, we're both from the UK, and there are plenty of identity issues in the UK that I think people generally aren't aware of and certainly don't think much about. So perhaps a day would be good for that reason. If there was, media coverage around identity issues on that day, maybe everybody should listen to the ID 16.9 podcast on that day.
I think that would make. I think that's a fantastic suggestion. I think people should listen to it on a weekly basis, though. I think it's something that needs to go on throughout the year, not just limited to one day.
Well, thank you.
It is an excellent podcast, and we've had many fantastic guests, and I'm very pleased to be part of it.
Including yourself. Well, thank you very much, Tom Fisher from Privacy International.
Thank you very much.
And one final note on ID Day. Our graphic designer, Alaiko Paye from Ghana, was the winner of the International ID Day artwork competition in 2021, and that's how we found him. We love his work for the show, and I hope you do too. To find out more about legal identity, the UN goals, and to listen to all our episodes, go to id169.com and see if you think we're on track for 2030.